to go?
Yep.
Okay. Today there have been reports that the press release which was issued by Australian Border Force on election day in respect of a vessel from Sri Lanka was done so under the direction of the former Prime Minister's office. Now, we've asked the Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs to look into this matter, but if those reports are correct, then this represents the final desperate acts of a dying government. In the last few hours of the Morrison government, what we have seen revealed is the true character of the Liberal Party. Because what's completely clear is that the Liberal Party does not care about the national interest, it only had regard for their political interest. In this press release and in the texts that followed, we saw our borders become less secure. We saw lives risked. We saw the national consensus around border security undermined. And what's completely clear is that when it comes to the national interest, the Liberal Party just does not give a damn. Now, on another matter, today we have announced that the Albanese government will be making a submission to the Fair Work Commission in respect of the national wage case. The government will argue that those on the minimum wage should not receive a real wage cut. We are experiencing in Australia a cost of living crisis because of the failures of the former Liberal government. We see that with rising power prices, with rising petrol prices. Now, we've outlined a plan to deal with the question of the cost of living, but a key component of that is to make sure that those who are on the minimum wage are not left behind. And that's why we will be making this submission. Questions?
Can I just ask on the Fair Work submission, if Fair Work does come back with an increase of less than 5% or somewhere in the low 4% range, which would represent a real wage cut, what are you guys going to do about that?
Well, we made clear that we thought it was really important that the government is using its voice, as governments have in the past, but not the Liberal government, that the government uses its voice to argue at national wage cases. And in this instance, to use its voice to argue that those on the minimum wage should not receive a real wage cut. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And today we've written to the Fair Work Commission to indicate that they should expect a submission from the government, and the submission will be in the terms I've described.
But why won't Labor include explicit dollar or percentage figures on the rise of the minimum wage in this submission?
The focus of the submission is what we've argued throughout the election campaign, what Anthony Albanese has been making clear, and that is that those on the minimum wage should not be left behind. And so the focus of the submission that we will be making to the national wage case is that those who are on the minimum wage should not receive a real wage cut.
On the broader economy, there are reports that builders are facing financial difficulties due to supply constraints, staff shortages and so on. Are you worried about the impact the building industry issues could have on the economy and employment? And is the government in discussion with the building industry on what could be done to manage these impacts and these financial difficulties?
I think what we've seen across the board is an economy that has been left in real strife by the former Liberal government. We see real constraints within the economy. We see significant inflation. And in respect to the building industry, and not just the building industry, real problems in both attracting or finding the skilled people that they need to do the jobs that they have to do, but also the availability of materials. This says everything about how this economy has been mismanaged. And again, we've made clear a range of policies, particularly in respect of skills, about making sure that we address the issues that the economy faces. This is difficult and it's not going to happen overnight, but we are absolutely committed to starting that job right now.
Has the government had discussions with the building industry?
Well, we've spoken with the building industry but, prior to the election and throughout, and we understand the issues that the building industry is facing. both in terms of finding materials, but also in terms of finding the people with the skills that they need. And it's a real issue within the building industry. In truth, it's a real issue right across the economy. We've got a skills crisis in this country. And the reason why we've got a skills crisis is because over the last 9 years, we've got a government which has cut billions of dollars out of funding for VET. We have less trainees and apprentices today than we did in 2013 when the former government took power. Think about that. The economy has grown, the labour force has grown, but the number of trainees and apprentices has gone in the wrong direction. That's why we've got a skills crisis in this country, and we put forward policies around free TAFE, for example, which will seek to address that.
On the bottom of the statement, how would you describe the actions of Rear Admiral Justin Jones in agreeing to the request on election day during caretaker?
Well, again, we've asked the Secretary of the Department to come back to us. I think what's really clear here is that this was an unusual event where a matter which should never have been in the public domain was placed in the public domain. And the reports today are that that happened at the direction of the Prime Minister's office. This really is the desperate acts of a dying government. It's an absolute disgrace. And the text messages that we then saw from the Liberal Party later in that day says everything about how the Liberal Party is only concerned about itself. It does not have regard for the national interest.
Sorry, just to follow on for that. Given that he accepted the request, he didn't refuse it, should the Rear Admiral resign?
The issue here is the actions of the former government. The former government sought to inject politics into a matter of national security. And it's not the first time we've seen that happen from the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party were always going there. And this is a matter that should have been above politics. This is a matter where actually, when it came to border security, there was a national consensus that this government sought to undermine. It sought to create division where none existed, and it sought to make this a matter of politics. And this is really serious. It's serious in the sense that it did make our borders less secure. It's serious in that it risked lives. It risked lives. And it undermined the national consensus that does exist around border security.
I expect you to remain Employment and Skills Minister beyond next week. And would you like to take back, since I know you had that portfolio more recently?
I'm going to have all those announcements made by the Prime Minister as they should be made.
I guess the other is in case of there would be an inquiry into what happened with the vote turnbacks and that announcement. Can you give us details about what that review process would look like, and will the findings be made public?
Well, we've asked the Secretary of the Department to look into this matter, and we await his report.
Will the Murrugappan family be returned to Billawheeler, and when will the statement confirming their future be released?
Yeah. Look, there's been really good progress on this matter. The circumstances of Nade's prayer and their two daughters and a potential return to Billawheeler will be the subject of a statement shortly that will be made by the interim minister responsible for Home Affairs, who's Jim Chalmers.
How shortly?
Very shortly.
Do you know when the family could be back in Queensland?
I'll leave that to the statement from the interim minister.
To go back to that inquiry, that review that the Secretary said, do you expect that there will be changes to the standard operating procedures related to vote sections?
What we want to understand the circumstances of this matter being put into the public domain, because that should not have happened. And we want to understand how we go from there to the Liberal Party then sending texts in a campaign setting on election day. Border security has been operating effectively, and we've made that clear, and we've made it clear that we support that. And in fact, what occurred in respect of those who are on this vessel was a return to Sri Lanka in a completely routine way that has occurred, that's consistent with what's occurred under the former government. Now, it's really important that we do maintain border security. And we've made it clear all along that Labor is completely committed to the architecture of border security that is in place right now, and we will continue to do that. And that's really important for the nation. It's the way in which we save lives. But what we've seen in terms of the politicisation of that event from the former Liberal government is a complete willingness of the Liberal Party to sacrifice the national interest for their own political interest.
Does Labor believe that the release of the information breached any legislation?
Well, again, we've asked the Secretary of the Department to have a look at this matter, and he'll come back to us on that. Thank you.
Richard, just a couple of questions on